Notorious, famous, infamous. What's the right term to describe the English Defence League? Constantly in the news in Britain and abroad. They claim to be a mainstream response to Islamic extremism, but some critics claim they're fascist thugs. Well, Tommy Robinson is their leader, and he's just been released from a prison in the UK, actually. Welcome to you, sir.
Good afternoon. How are you doing?
What now? How long were you were in Bedford Prison in Bedfordshire, just north of London? How long were you there?
I was there for a week.
Right.
I was there for a week on remand.
And you've been in prison before?
I was in prison in 2004 when I was younger for an assault.
OK, so the last time in prison, 8 days, you were described by some people as a political prisoner. Would that be appropriate?
I believe it is. The whole reason I was sent to jail was for going to a demonstration and protesting. That's my God-given right. It's the authorities are trying to silence what we're saying against Islam. They're trying to silence the voice that's rising from the street, and they want to stop us. And I think this was to send a warning to the rest of our membership. I was arrested and given bail conditions. The bail conditions stopped me from sending faxes, emails, texts, anything that promotes the English Defence League. Now, that's not very democratic, especially in the so-called land of democracy. Yeah.
Now, let's talk about the English Defence League, because there are people watching in Canada who won't know what it is. And, you know, I lived in Britain until I was 26, 27 years old. I can remember the far right and some of the fights that I had, frankly, not on my own, with some of these guys. But the claim is the English Defence League, there may be some people in it who have some quite unsavoury politics, but for the most part, the majority of them are simply ordinary, generally working-class people in Britain who are frightened of Islamic extremism, and they think Sharia law has to be stood up against. What would you say?
Exactly. We're a grassroots movement made up of members of all different kinds of communities, all different backgrounds coming together. And you're right using the word fearful, because we're extremely fearful of what's happening to our country. We're fed up. There's been an inability by the government, an inability by the police to tackle or even talk about Islamism and extremist Islam, which is spreading like a disease across this country. And when you sit and do the demographics, the statistics and the facts, it's worrying and it's terrifying, and we're trying to create a platform in order to put pressure on the politicians to start hearing what we're saying, because many of these politicians don't understand what we're talking about, because they don't live at the bottom. They don't live in these working class communities. We're affected by it on a daily basis. And as soon as you try and talk up about it or even have a discussion about it, you're beaten down with this racist tag, this far right. Anyone that calls us far right, there's nothing far right about the English Defence League at all. We're not a far right organisation. We have a Sikh division, we have a Jewish division, we have a lesbian and gay division. There's nothing far right about us, and that's a tactic used in order to stifle the debate, in order to stifle and silence what we're saying. Let's just discriminate, let's just label them all as far-right extremists. And that's what they're doing to us. That's what the media's doing to us over here. We're up against the media, we're up against the politicians, we're up against the police forces, which are being used for political policing in order to silence what we're saying.
Now, look, I would agree that definition of a racist, someone who's winning an argument against a liberal. I understand that. And I think that the mass of people who are with you are just ordinary British people. However, waving the Israeli flag, a Jewish division, there are some who say, oh, there's a handful of people, but there's still that hardcore of neo-Nazi types who are in your organisation. Is that true?
There's no neo-Nazis on an organisation. If you go on any neo-Nazi websites, if you type in RVF EDL, you'll see a video by real neo-Nazis threatening to murder me. If you just have to go on any of their websites to see what their stance is against us. They hate us. Don't get me wrong. When this organisation started, it was a nationalistic organisation, and you can't expect purity from an organisation that was 3, 4, 5, 6 months old. Purity comes with time. We're 2 years old, over 2 years old, and we're getting that purity now. We've kicked out any rogue elements. When this started, it was majority lads, young lads that were fed up and that were willing to take to the streets. Now, if you go to a demonstration, you see like about 30% of our support now is women, is females, is mothers, grandmothers. Our support base has changed, it's becoming more mainstream, which is what we want. And there are no neo-Nazis in the English Defence League. There's not. Anyone that's found with any racist views which don't fit our agenda and fit what we stand for, they're kicked out immediately. Which is, you find racists in the Labour Party, you find racists in the police force. Don't get me wrong, there probably are some racists within the English Defence League, but when they raise their head, they're kicked straight out, because that's not what we stand for.
All right, just going beyond that, and we've got plenty of time, because I want to ask you about your policies and so on, but, you know, I grew up going to football, going to soccer as a Tottenham fan, and when I was a kid, I got involved in things I probably shouldn't have, but most of the people I knew, you know, the hard nuts, the likely lads, they weren't Nazi. They had some strange views, but they were pretty decent people. But they did like the violent aspect of the whole thing. They liked the confrontation. An accusation has been, even if they're not Nazis, you do attract a lot of soccer fans who just want to get into a big fight. True?
It's no, what it is, when we first started, we left Luton and we went to Birmingham, and when we got to Birmingham, we had our heads kicked in. We were attacked by gangs and gangs of Muslim youth. Now, that went across the whole country in the newspapers. Now, when we went to Manchester, how many female, middle-aged school teachers are going to come out on the street and oppose militant Islam when we all know the consequences? It's a violent reaction. You're not going to get many. So the people that were willing to step forward and take to the streets were the brave people, the fearless people, the people who are of the mindset, we're not backing down. You're not beating us off the streets and you're not beating us into silence. Now, if that stereotypically comes across as a so-called football hooligan, which basically means you're a young lad who's not going to be prepared to back down, that's all we are. It's like myself, I don't claim to sit here and polish my halo. I'm a likely lad. I haven't been an angel, I never will be an angel, but at the same time, we're standing up for what's right. And I believe that the people that we're attracting, when you say that, even like myself, the upbringing we've had and what we've seen in towns and cities like Luton, it gives us more of a qualification to explain the problems around Islam than someone who's gone to a university and read about it in a book. Yeah. We're talking on lifelong experiences. We're living in these communities, and it doesn't make us hooligans to be willing to stand up and say, no, enough is enough, we're not backing down. We don't promote violence, but we will defend ourselves if we go out on the streets and we come under attack. And they're the sort of people that you saw joining the English Defence League, the young lads, the men that are not prepared to back down. And they're straightway stereotyped as hooligans. You don't stereotype, no one stereotypes every Muslim with a beard as an extremist or a terrorist. But they get so many news reporters feel it okay to say, well, look, they're hooligans, they've got bald heads and they've got beer bellies. And it's not on, really, to be honest. Yeah,
you just described the person who was interviewing you. Stay with us, a lot more to talk about. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to you. Now, the English Defence League, the EDL, and their leader, Tommy Robinson, North America now, we see them. I mean, there have been stabbings. Members of this organisation have been attacked. Their buses have been attacked by gangs of young Muslims. Now, this organisation, a lot of the guys who are in it are pretty rough and ready. You know, they're not always coming out with PhDs. They're the sort of people that, I don't know, filled the British Army in 1940 when Britain needed to be defended against Nazism. The reason I say this, I get a bit tired of people who've known nothing but privilege condemning working-class guys when they merely say, you know what, we'd like to defend what we have. The sort of area I grew up in, there are some bad guys involved, but generally they're very decent people. This organisation, I'm not sure what it completely stands for. We're going to find out. Tommy Robinson is leader of the EDL. Tommy, what do you want? I mean, do you want Muslims to leave Britain, or do you want Muslims to be part of British culture and not want to impose Sharia law and extremism?
We want peace, that's what we want. We want a prosperous future for our children. We don't have to worry about what the future holds. We don't want Sharia law. We want Muslims to integrate into our society, integrate and assimilate the same way every other community has done. But they're not. And that's not our fault that they're not. We seem to get blamed somehow for why they're not integrating, why we have Islamic ghettos, why we have the call for Sharia law, why we have extremist gangs on the streets, why we have Muslim paedophile gangs from one end of the country to the other. And we want it to work. It's simply not working. So we're coming out now saying we've waited for you to sit around tables for politically minded people to talk about how we can solve these issues. You're not solving them. You're not dealing with them. We've got more Islamists and extremists now in this country than we've ever had. It's on the rise faster than it's ever been, and you're simply trying to brush it under the carpet. And that is going to lead into such a civil breakdown at some point in the future if these problems are not tackled and dealt with now.
So your problems are not with ordinary Muslim people living in Britain?
No, I'm from Luton. Some of the best people I've met growing up are Muslim. Some of my good friends growing up have been Muslim. Our problem is with aspects and certain parts of the ideology of Islam. And certain parts of it need highlighting how backward and deranged certain parts of it are. And with fascism and Islamofascism, which is exactly what it is. Islam is a fascist ideology that's masquerading as a religion. But at the same time, we do recognise there are some great Muslims out there. And what we would like to see is, I keep asking myself, when will Muslims take to the streets against their fellow Muslims that are bringing their religion into disrepute? Because we're not seeing it. All we ever see is them take to the streets against us when we're trying to talk out against these issues. But yet you've got Muslims last week on September the 11th absolutely terrorising people's memories of the war dead, and going down and insulting the whole of America, insulting the whole of Britain, and there's no reaction from the Muslim community. We don't see any public outrage, but yet we see public outrage over a few cartoons. We see public worldwide outrage. So we want to know, when are the moderate Muslims going to come out and really confront the extremists within their ideology? Which, to be honest, I don't see that they're ever going to do it, because they're all Muslim brothers. That's how they class each other.
Look, I agree with you that there have been some incredibly provocative, repugnant acts that have been committed in the UK and in the Netherlands and France and Denmark and Sweden and elsewhere. Remembrance Day, poppies being burnt, British soldiers coming back from Afghanistan being booed in the street. But it's a very small number of Muslims, and the majority of Islamic people in Britain might say, well, we don't agree with them, but we're not going to demonstrate. It's not what we do. You had a leading Conservative politician who's a Muslim. She condemned these actions.
Yeah, but condemning them is one thing. We've heard them condemn them for years. We're fed up of words. We want action. They're soon quick to take to the streets and protest over anyone who says anything against Islam. Why don't we see them coming out against? And when you say it's a small number, they are a small number that take to the streets. There was 300 or 400 at the American embassy burning the American flag on September 11th. But when you see government statistics such as 37% want Sharia law, that's not a small number. That's 1.4 million Muslims in this country. That's a problem. That's a problem that's not being tackled. We've got extremist Islamists in all our universities. No one's stopping them. It's like I was talking to a local Luton Muslim imam, and I said to him, this year on Freshers Week, when all the students go to the university, are the Islamic community going to get down there and confront those Islamists that are recruiting down there and brainwashing? Because if you don't, we will. And if we do it, we'll be called far-right extremists. Now, when you do it, you'll be hailed as heroic moderates. But they won't do it. They won't do it.
One thing I have to tell people here, because again, this is not just about the UK, this is throughout Europe. In fact, parts of Europe are worse than the UK, and I don't think North America has been touched by this to the same extent. But, you know, I grew up in England. My father was Jewish. I grew up in Ilford, a heavily Jewish area. There was hardly any anti-Semitism. I mean, there were a few loonies on the fringe, but no one really cared very much. Anti-Semitism has become an important issue now in Britain, and if you look at the attacks on normally elderly Jewish people, over and over again, almost without exception, it's young Muslims who are doing the attacking. Why is it that whenever you speak out, you're accused, for example, of being anti-Semitic? I've never heard you say anything about Jewish people in any way negative.
I know, it's ridiculous. As I said, and when you talk about the Jewish thing, I live in Luton, and we've got a Jew could not walk from one end of the Islamic community to the other with a skull cap. Now, this is the year 2011 in Britain. That's not on. I saw some Orthodox Jews, this was about 4 or 5 years ago, and I saw about 6 police officers around them, and they were walking with them, and I thought, I wonder what was going on there. And then it clicked. They're getting a police escort to be able to walk down the street in Luton. And that's shocking. And no one wants to talk about these issues. The Luton Islamic Centre used to be a synagogue until they smashed it to pieces. When the Jewish families were remembering the Holocaust outside Luton Town Hall, about 40 or 50 Islamists turned up, and the Jewish family had to lock themselves inside our town hall with a 5-year-old girl there who was crying her eyes out. Now, all this goes unnoticed. The media suppress it. No one wants to talk about it. If you're looking at wherever any Islamic area is, anti-Semitism is on the rise, homophobic attacks are on the rise, all the things that come with Islam, which are symptoms of Islam, no one wants to talk about or tackle. As soon as we start talking about them, we're deemed as far-right and deemed as racist.
Got to tell you, Tommy, if you're a fascist, you hide it very, very well indeed. Will you come back on the show at some point?
I'll come back on any time, and as I said, I'm not fascist. Islamism and Nazism are opposite sides of the same coin. They're identical, and we're allowing Islamism to flourish. We're allowing it to spread across our country like a wildfire just because it goes under the guise of a religion, and no one wants to tackle it.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.